Amazing that the Tories were actually containment. Unironically, this is actually always contained by the Tories with their platitudes. Their actions, of course, completely revealed them to be exactly what they are. But the platitudes were enough to stop people from going.
And the Tories were quite good at this because they always had a scheme. Now, the last time the scheme was we're going to ship them off to Rwanda.
Yeah.
And before that, it was something else. I forget what I think. But basically, every 18 months, the Tories had this process. Announce a plan, then get pushed back in the media, get pushed back in the courts, defend it, argue it, drop it, new scheme.
Fail.
And they did that every 18 months.
Yeah.
The latest one was the Rwandan one.
Yeah.
Now, what Starmer did when he came in is he immediately dropped the Rwanda thing and he didn't replace it with a new containment scheme.
Nope.
So when these murders happened of these three little girls, and actually, as you rightly said on the podcast, Bo, it wasn't just the three little girls murdered. The rest of the girls in that room were attacked with a machete, and some of them are dealing with truly grievous injuries. And we don't know if any more of them are going to die, but certainly many have been disfigured horribly. And let's keep remembering these three little girls because the media and the government are very keen to memory hold them. You know, it's a completely untenable situation for them.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And so, like I said, Starmer has made the worst possible mistake, which is abandoning containment. No, I'm not going to try and mollify the English population who feel afraid in their own country because we've been importing millions and millions of strangers, and it turns out that some of them are insane and violent, and it's just part and parcel of the multicultural society. Because I think Starmer is a believer in the multicultural society. I think he genuinely is a true believer of this. And so the people on the other side are just racists. They are open to be persecuted.
Would I be able to say something about that? Because I think that the sort of arrangement that Starmer's got, and he's sort of slowly hemorrhaging support from Muslims that are going to the Green Party, is he's got this sort of Islamo-leftist coalition, and the native British people are basically the enemies of the Labour Party.
100%.
And he doesn't really care about them. They're irrelevant to his source of power. And he cares about enacting his vision. As you say, I think he is a true believer, and he'd happily rule over the ashes of Britain if it meant that on paper it can be run on leftist principles.
100%. So going back to his statement, right, and I just find this
there was a slight reliance. Sorry, there was a slight reliance on the white British working class because at the most recent election, the Red Wall was rebuilt. That's never coming back. That's never coming back. We'll get
to that a little bit later.
All along the Red Wall.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit. So I wanted to talk about the tone of his statement, right? So the next statement, like there are just some parts in it that are just insane, absolutely insane. So obviously he's like, no, the people who participated in the violence will face full force of the law. Well, when he says the people, he means the English rioters. It will not be the Muslims. So to him, they're not part of the people. They're outside of it. They're going to have nothing happen to them. Right. And so obviously making arrests. And this is the one line. I guarantee you will regret taking part in this disorder. Right. Vengeful. He is vengeful about this. This is an emotional statement. This is not the abstract, emotionless, machine-like managerial class being like, well, we're just going to do what the system demands of us. No, he is coming for you. He is offended that you dare do any of these things. This is about honor. This is about his pride. This is about self-respect. I guarantee you will regret it, is the sort of thing like you say to someone who is wronging you, who is personally wronging you. You know, if like someone's like trying to hit on your girl, you'd be like, I'll make you regret this. You know, that's the sort of thing you say to that.
Someone you mean to beat up in the immediate future.
Exactly. And that's exactly what Keir Starmer is doing to the white working class, the English working class.
One of the reasons I think this might be, just building off of Dan's point, is because he's offended that the white working class are no longer bending the knee, so to speak, to the containment mechanisms he's inherited from the Tories, because we've raised the spectre of the Manchester Arena bombing during the course of this conversation. Don't Look Back in Anger worked. It was evil, but it worked. And the reason Raiku worked is because they had total coordination between the nudge unit set up by the Cameron government. It was Baroness Worsey's chief of staff when she was in charge of the Conservative Party, then went and headed up Raikou at the Home Office, which rolled out Don't Look Back in Anger, which rolled out a lot of the COVID narrative measures that worked to cast a spell on the general public. And Starmer has wrong-footed this entire situation because he didn't respond dynamically when he laid the wreath and was heckled, and he didn't give a press conference about this denoting his sympathies. Instead, the first press conference he gave was about the quote-unquote far right. So he's constantly made missteps in the messaging, and then the entire apparatus around him hasn't responded dynamically enough to make up for his missteps. And I think this is why he's taking it personally, because he feels his grip on power on the narrative just loosening.
But just the thing, he's also, again, I think from the perspective of the true believer, I think he's vengeful against the white working class because they don't buy into the universal liberal principles, right? I think that he views them as backsliders, traitors to that. You've always voted Labour, which means you've always voted for this, but you don't realise it until it's got to this point.
Can I make an observation? Sorry, Stairs.
No, well,
just an observation about Starmer in general there, and this is a little bit just my personal opinion.
Sure.
I feel like deep down in his own gut, in his own soul, inside his own head,
assuming he has one,
he thinks of himself as the latest incarnation of a strong leftist leader, someone like Lenin, Stalin, Mao, where he will hold on to power with an iron grip.
Yeah.
With an iron grip, and nothing could remove him from power. But at the same time, appears like a terrified Postman Pat caricature with he's like, you know, so it's, I think there's a weird dichotomy going on. Well, that's what I see.
It's strong substitute teacher vibes, isn't it?
Yeah, right, yeah. Trying to be a really strong substitute teacher. Exactly.
Take him seriously.
No.
It'd be easier to take him seriously if he didn't sound like a Rowan Atkinson character.
Yeah, but you're completely on the money with the strong leftist leader, because the universal principles of leftism is what he's constantly appealing to, right? My moral legitimacy comes from this kind of universal recognition perspective of liberalism. And so he's very hard spoken when he's invoking that. But obviously,
but at the same time, at a glance, a weakling, you see him trying to punch that punching bag.
Exactly.
A weak man.
Exactly.
Weak men in positions of power, terrifying.
Can I add something here? So one of the things that people don't realize is that multiculturalism is not assimilation. Multiculturalism is against assimilation.
Obviously.
So it directly says different communities should not assimilate.
Yeah.
So to respect someone else implies you have to respect their culture.
So just tolerate their culture, however
exactly.
evil it might be.
Yes, and I think it's not just live and let live culture, it's wokeness. And wokeness adds the element of addressing historical inequalities into the mix. And I think that the Don't Look Back in Anger narrative that you mentioned, Connor, as being an evil one, is something that shows the contradiction in people's minds, that you cannot tell to native indigenous Europeans, and in this case, native English people, don't look back in anger, and at the same time, for decades, bombard the English people with the narrative of addressing historical inequalities. It's like, don't look back in anger, English people, but everyone else, no, you have grievances against the English.
You should be looking back in anger.
You should be
the British Empire.
Yes. So what Starmer does now is exactly doubling down on that narrative.
Yes.
Like an ideologue.
So the next thing I wanted to pick out of this particular speech, again, this should come out literally like one of those world historic speeches where all of the wrong buttons were pressed. So the next one is like, well, whether directly or those whipping up this action online and then running away themselves, as in singling out Tommy Robinson. He may as well have just named him, because Tommy Robinson, of course, has left the country because he was going on holiday before all of this happened. So again, it's not like he was whipping this up saying, right, go out and riot, and then ran. He was leaving, he was out, and then the riot started independent of him because events overtook situations. But there we go. Starmer knows who the enemies are, right? He knows who the enemies of his regime are. He knows Farage, even though in the first one he didn't name drop Farage when people were asking him, when the journalists were asking him. He does know that Farage represents that. Essentially, a lot of these people will be reform voters, ex-Labour voters who are voting for reform. And he recognizes that Tommy and Farage are essentially representatives of these people, whether Farage wants to be or not. And this, he's like, those whipping up action lines, so we're going to get a wave of censorship. So be careful what you say.
There's a contradiction here that I think occurs in Starmer's speech, because he's a trained lawyer, as you have said, and I'm also trained to find, legalistic ideas. So in his first speech, he did something interesting that a lot of leftists didn't do. He drew a distinction between a tiny organized minority and the community. But in attacking people who have been involved in, let's say, defending the community and being very vocal in being against the riots, he also goes against this.
So I think that it's just very interesting how he's definitely going to be targeting right-wing commentators. So our friends, I guess our online community, they're going to be subject to state repression. And this is going to be entirely political.
Well, on that, I think if we can take a moment to be arrogant here, then I've got to say, I think the failure of these kinds of don't look back in anger regime narratives also comes down to the fact that platforms like us have a bit more reach and reach an enormous audience. Some of our videos get hundreds of thousands of views, and that'll be people speaking to their own family members as well, showing their family members. And I think we should be quite proud of the fact that we have been able to destroy some of these regime narratives.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.